Welcome to the Grow Renaissance podcast. Let's nourish the world.
Okay, welcome back to Pastor Primetime, a Grow Renaissance podcast series hosted by myself, Neil, and the wonderful Amanda Smith. We're going to dig into ideas, people, practices driving agriculture forward today. And our guest is Dan Avukian, better known as the Produce Man. Dan has a couple of big shout outs that he wants to mention, a couple of groups that he interacts with and support him. Ag Life Media, which if you read his hat there very closely, you'll see the logo, and justsayit.com. Now, Dan brings experience in the produce industry on the downstream, on numerous different pieces of how we talk about produce and into the consumer corridor. Dan's going to be talking a little bit about that today and sharing some perspectives about what is working in agriculture from a produce side and potentially what isn't. So we're looking forward to this conversation today, Dan. Thanks for taking some time. Thanks for being here. I'd love to toss the mic over to you and have you share a bit more about who you are and why it is you do what you do.
Well, thank you, Neil and Amanda. It's a pleasure to be here with you, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, let's see, what is this? We're late April or mid-April, and next month will be 50 years for me in fresh produce, so I'm going to celebrate that a little bit, I think. So I've had a good time in the industry all my life, and I don't plan on retiring anytime soon. If I can go another 50 years, well, then I will. But anyway, I enjoy doing it. I've worked retail, wholesale, food service, distribution, home delivery, had my own produce company, my own produce store, and I've just been around in many aspects of the industry my entire life. I fell in love with it at 15 years old with my first job after being a paper boy. And from there, it's just been a long, wild ride, that's for sure. So that's it.
There's a lot happening in the industry right now.
Yeah, the produce industry today, it's changed. And it's expected to. So many things over the years. I mean, when I started, commercially on the market, there wasn't even a red seedless grape. Definitely no such thing as a seedless watermelon or even a mini watermelon and, things like that. And things have changed to, for the consumer mainly, and of course for food service. And then, the varieties change for better growing, which Neil, you know all about that.
Mm-hmm.
Different varieties of specific commodities for different growing regions and longevity and shelf life. And, we saw tomatoes go to something very tasteless and cardboard type flavor for shipping purposes back to let's get the flavor back into them as well. So we've seen this up and down ride throughout the years. It's great.
Absolutely. I know that, sometimes you get those tomatoes and they taste like pink foam to me. That's the only way that I can describe it. It's just that weird kind of texture-y. Not my favorite. Glad they're bringing the health back to them.
Well, people used to ask me in my store. In fact, I had a friend of mine in my store one time. He actually used to run my, whatever you do for the credit card processing. That wasn't really my department. It was my business partner's department. But anyway, he became a good friend of mine. And he was talking to me one time out on the floor. And a lady walks up, and it's in January. And she says, Dan, what are the best tasting tomatoes right now?
Mm.
And I looked at her and I said, none. She said, what? I said, none. I said, the closest thing you're going to get to any flavor are these cherry tomatoes out of Mexico. Your best flavored tomato is going to be in July. That's all there is to it. And my friend William, he looked at me and he said, Dan, I cannot believe that. He goes, you didn't try and sell her something, that was like telling her this was the greatest tomato in the world and the whole bit. You just told her the truth. And I said, yeah, I did tell her the truth. My name is attached to it. What if she has people over for a dinner party and she slices up the tomatoes and she says, Dan said these are the best. And everybody eats them and they're like, man, this doesn't taste good. So, a reputation and the whole bit. But also I wanted her to know I would like to educate my customers on the times of the year that certain items are better than they are at other times of the year, seasonally.
Mm-hmm.
Seasonally supposed to grow, and I think it's such an interesting thing that in America we're such a mass consumption society. We want everything all the time, and we're eating produce that isn't normally available at those time periods, and we're getting it shipped in.
Sure. It travels a distance in some cases. We get produce from all over the place, and especially the southern hemisphere. And look at asparagus right now. In California, we had 36,000 acres of fresh asparagus back in 20 years ago. It was one of the biggest commodities in California, and we're down to less than 1,000 acres. Mm-hmm. And that's all due to imports. Imports came in a lot cheaper and out of Mexico, and then, of course, Peru the rest of the year. And the California growers couldn't compete with it. You mix that with labor cost as well. Asparagus is still harvested by hand. You can't machine pick asparagus. That's all there is to it. You got to keep those tips intact. And so between the labor costs, the flooding of the imports from Mexico and the southern hemisphere, and then, of course, water and restrictions and the whole bit. The water was going to more profitable commodities. The industry it just died out. Now you have some diehards in there, which I'm very grateful for. And I see that in the stores now. And I've been buying it because, to me, California asparagus, there's just nothing like it. And Washington State and New Jersey and the other places that it grows, there's nothing like your homegrown, sweet, vibrant, good asparagus. But, that's an industry that is in this state that is drastically reduced. So I'm grateful for the growers that are still doing it. Organic growers and a few conventional growers. But, how long will that go on for? Will the next generation in those families want to do this? So That's one thing. But right now I'm enjoying a lot of good California asparagus because it's spring and that's when you're supposed to eat asparagus.
Well, you've inspired me to go to the store and get some this afternoon. There's nothing better.
Yeah.
All right, there we go. We've got a sale. Look at that.
A little piece of interesting information about asparagus, actually. The genetics for the seeds, pretty much 95% of the asparagus growers coast to coast are all using the same genetics, and those are coming out of a group out of Canada. And so a lot of the Washington State, California, and other places are working with this quality, and it's because really the market did die, and the only person that had a quality seed that was still preserving that ancestral and pedigree component of the genetics focused on that in Canada, and so they supply. And I'm not sure if you've seen those little carts that harvest asparagus, Dan or Amanda.
Oh, yes.
I've always wanted one just to rip around on. Basically lie down and you just, it's like a little go-kart. Yeah. I thought it would be perfect.
Well, that's interesting. Let me ask you then on the seed, because I hate to say this, but in the old days, we would have our California asparagus season, and then it would wind down, and then we would bring it in from the Northwest, Washington. Yeah. I remember that Homer label with that bird on it. I'll never forget it. And that asparagus had a beautiful burgundy red blush tone to it. Yeah. Absolutely gorgeous. Is that seed or is that weather? Or maybe soil? What would the difference be if everyone's using the same seed? Or maybe back then, maybe everyone wasn't using the same seed. But doesn't it grow out of a rhizome as well?
You brought in a lot of different factors here. Back in the day, there was a lot more variety because the industry's kind of imploded, and we've got very constrained. These seed options are very down to one. Not that it's being centralized on purpose. It's just sort of out of the law of intention sort of there that, the demand and supply. The burgundy red it is a factor of the genetics, but it's also a factor of the two other things that you just mentioned. And so the soil biology, which leads to the rhizome functionality, as well as the environmental conditioning. And so, if you have early sprouts and then you get a frosting, you're going to change the spears on the top end, even though the genetics and the soil might be good. If you've got less functioning soil and really good weather, so maybe a really hot spring and the soil isn't functioning, you're going to change the composition of how that spear is actually sprouting, and it might actually start flowering out before it gets to full height. And so, I mean, you've got a lot of different factors. You might get really white bases and that go up much further if you have too much moisture or too little moisture. I mean, there's all kinds of conditions that play around with it. The neat thing is that asparagus is pretty resilient, and so, particularly in the bunching and then processing and the cutting and the gubbies, you can usually retain, more than 60% of that sphere, even if you've got some different coloration, and you can size it and sort it based on some of that color stacking. Yeah, the really rich burgundy mixed with like that vibrant green that goes down a little bit further, sort of the ideal image. And that has changed a lot because of the different conditions. I think one of the neat things I like about asparagus in particular is, it really isn't dependent on some of the input structure that you see with a lot of other crops. You kind of have in the northern states and into Canada, you get the snow melting and you get a little bit of, work in the fields and you see these sprouts coming through, right? And you're not doing a ton of application use. And so resiliency is all about how you set up the soil at end of season from the previous year, and where it comes through. So be on the lookout for that. I mean, locally grown, I think quality, bunching, food miles are all things to think about. But there is really good processors that, are doing the right thing by water and cooling to make sure you get really healthy asparagus in store for purchase during the May-June season. So.
Now, you mentioned the frost, and I'm just curious, how does that affect the flavor? That must sweeten it up a little bit, that you get that nice sweet undertone.
It depends when the frost happens. So
okay,
if it happens during emergence, like right at the, you imagine the spear coming out of the ground and you're freezing that tip, you typically aren't going to have too much issue. If you're freezing it as it gets further along in the growing cycle, you do get some richness because in the soil, what's happening is it's actually sucking up some of those sugars, right? And so you think about all the nutrients, macro components, because what happens when we get cold as humans? We go to put layers on, right? We're preserving heat.
Absolutely.
What does that entail us to do? We want to drink sweet drinks. Because we need the sugar replenishment, right? And so during the cold, why you get that sweetness component, Dan, is because you're sucking up the sugars in the soils, right? That the root exudates are actually previously just pushing out through the nodules and the nodes in the ground. Now, if you've got it almost to maturity and you get a frost, you actually might lose a lot of the flavor. And so there's like a sweet spot, no pun intended, for, that late frost happening. Ideally, if you're pretty close to harvest, we're not getting any more frosts and, we're getting ready to put the buggies in the field. But it is really important to just to watch the weather and what that does. They get picked anyway. There's a lot that goes to waste. There's really good for animals, though, like as a byproduct, I think. And even what I would call the secondary market, there's groups. There's a group in Canada called Second Harvest. They do a lot of pickup of ungraded asparagus that goes to feed, food banks and et cetera and so forth. But I also like them for rudiments. I mean, they add a component of nutrition, fiber, and, some other values that you can grind up and pelletize and give to animal.
Fantastic. Wow, that's great. See, in the fresh produce business, you learn something new every single day, and that's what keeps it exciting and never boring. That's for sure.
It's amazing how much specialty information there is, just crop to crop, region to region. I mean, there's no cookie cutter, one size fits all at all in our industry.
So that, that's a message to, the average consumer out there. Get the local asparagus while you can, because if you have a craving for it other times of the year, it travels and it loses. I think it loses flavor in the travel because, or like you said, our local soil is just better.
Yeah.
I guess, for less, not so much production. Wow, fantastic.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about Egg Life Media and Just Say It. I'd love, we give a couple of shout outs there. You're engaged with these groups. You're wearing the hat of one. So I'd love to hear a bit more.
Well, Ag Life Media was started by Patrick Kelly, and he's started that during the lockdown that we had here in California, 7 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. What year is this? 26? Yeah.
Right.
And, he started something called the Produce Industry Podcast. He's a citrus guy.
Yeah.
His family's been in citrus. Their roots go way, way back, several decades. And so he started doing this podcast. At the same time, I had gone to, we were all bored twiddling our thumbs. And I called my old co-host from my old radio show, Guido the Gardener, who we did the Produce Pair together. I was Dan the Produce Man. He was Guido the Gardener. And we did this national radio show on the Talk America Radio Network and Universal Talk Network about fresh produce every Saturday. It was live, and it was a call-in talk show and for the consumer, but we had a lot of industry folks as well listening. So I called him because, again, we were sitting around. I said, hey, let's revive the Produce Pair as a podcast. And he says, yeah, I got nothing else to do. Let's give it a shot. So we did. And we did it for a few years, but it got hard pinning down guests in Guido's schedule at the time. So we just let it go. And at the same time, Patrick Kelly was starting this Produce Industry Podcast. He called me up and said, hey, I've been watching your YouTube videos for years. I'm a big fan. I heard that you were going to downsize the Produce Pair or stop doing the Produce Pair podcast. He said, I need a second show. I'm on Mondays. I need something on Fridays. I already have the name of the show. I just want you to host it. It's called Fresh from the Field Fridays. And so I said, yeah, okay, why not? So started doing that. Then we brought on some other shows with Global Fresh Series with Juanita Gallo, someone I've known for many, many years in this industry. And she is a world traveler, and she interviews growers from around the world. And so that's a Global Fresh Series. We have the History of Produce with a guy named John Papp, and he is backed by Cornell University, and he is a history fanatic, enthusiast, I guess you would call it. So it's a really good program. And then some other shows on the network as well. And then Patrick, I think he bought or helped found Ag Life Media. So he took the Produce Industry Podcast and the other shows that are on there, created the Produce Industry Network. Then Ag Life Media comes along, and Ag Life Media is behind the Produce Industry Network. So there's a lot of other things that Patrick Kelly does on the network and with Ag Life Media, producing other podcasts. I think Avocado One and 3 or 4 other podcasts. But those are the main ones on that. But Ag Life Media, produce, poultry, meat, I think dairy. I'm not quite sure what else, but quite a bit there. So that's a lot of fun. And then I was approached by a friend of mine, Ron Pelger, who writes for the Produce News. And he said, hey, we're putting together a site called justsayit.com. And the proceeds from that site, any advertising that we get, goes to, I can't remember if it's Save the Children or similar to Covenant House, things that benefit disadvantaged kids and teens of all walks of life. Right. And so he said, would you be willing to let us access your video library to put on the site and be part of that? And I said, yes, absolutely. So between justsayit.com and Ag Life Media, there's a lot going on there. Then I do my own stuff, my Getting Fresh with Dan the Produce Man. And I don't do as much as I used to, but I'm starting to again. It's hit and miss. And then, speaking of the Produce Pair, the radio show, I went into my garage and I found this huge tote full of old cassette tapes of our radio shows from going back from 1998, and then some of them are on CD, up to 2005. So I've been taking those a little at a time and recording them into the computer editing out. I got in trouble. I had to edit out some of the music that we used in the program because there's copyrights and the whole bit. And I used a lot of vegetable and fruit themed songs for in and out for the breaks because it was radio. Podcasting's different. It's conversation. It's more relaxed. Radio is boom, 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 tight. So we would have bumper music going in and out. So I have to cut as much of that out as possible. And, of course, old commercials. Some of them, if there's some historic news segments, because the news would be at the bottom of the hour and at the top, I'll leave those in just for historic purposes. So I've been throwing those up on the Produce Pair podcast page because it's still active and alive. And every once in a while, when my good buddy Guido the Gardener comes to town, we'll make a new one. So
that's amazing.
That. So it's a lot of fun, that's for sure.
It's the days of cassettes, making mixtapes for your friends. And, you know what I mean? That was like you knew you were in on the friendship level, or when you got that cassette tape that someone burned just for you.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Oh, that's amazing, Dan. So how long have you been doing radio and podcasts?
Well, radio I started in 1982. I was a rock jock on KCFM in San Francisco or here in the Bay Area. And that's when you could play your own records,
Right.
So, you had a list of things that you should be playing, and I would bring my albums as well. And I had a wide collection from rock and roll to real country music to rockabilly to blues to real jazz, not the high class disco stuff that came out, the real jazz, bluegrass, just Americana, a wide variety, and I love a wide variety of music, and so and that's kind of interesting too because what happened was the station was top 40 during the day. And you know how boring that can get. I mean, come on, top 40. And so, but at 7:00 at night, they gave me free reign. Do whatever you want. So right after that top of the hour ID and some, adult contemporary, produced tune was played, I would start it off with something bold right after that ID, something just wild and, rocking just to show, hey, there's a change here. But what happened was I was working at the produce market at the same time and doing that at night.
Yeah.
And so I would bring stuff to the studio, peaches, apples, nectarines, apricots, berries, whatever, right? Then folks in the studio started asking me questions. And so I would answer them. And then the phones would start ringing. Hey, I bought a cantaloupe the other day and it tasted like a rubber chicken and blah, blah, blah. Well, what's the deal here? And I started answering questions and that was that. And then playing music too. So I didn't think much of it. But after we sold the station and it changed format and, that's what happens. I was at the produce market and that's where Guido the Gardener kept coming in and saying, Dan, we got to do a produce radio show. People in the business and, you're connected. Let's do a produce radio show. I was going, nah, I don't want to do that. He goes, come on. He must have bugged me for a year to do that produce radio show. He goes, I already have the perfect name, the Produce Pair. And I said, PAIR, a pair of produce guys.
Yeah.
So finally I said, okay, look. I'm going to quiet this guy down. I'm going to take him out to my friend's radio station out in Contra Costa County. And this is the same guy that I was at KCFM. I was with at KCFM, and now he was out at, I think it was KATD at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to take him out there. We'll use the production room. We'll make a tape. I'll let him send it out to all the different stations and let him get the disappointing no from everybody. And then he'll leave me alone, right? And, he was a friend of mine. He was also, best friends with my little sister's boyfriend. So I'd known him for quite a while, but he was in the produce business. So we go out to this station and we're using the production room. And my friend at the time, Jay Michaels was his radio name, and he sets us up in the production room, and he's the program director. And we start making this tape. We're going back and forth. And I didn't know, but there was a speaker in the president's office where he could hear what was going on in the production room. Like 15 minutes into the thing, he burst in and said, "We want you on the air." And I said, "What?" And Guido looks at me and goes, "See?" And I go, "Oh, no."
It backfired on you.
But, hey, it worked out. So we did it locally for a couple of months. And then Jay got us picked up by the Talk America Radio Network and then the Universal Talk Network. And we went for a good 7 years every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. And, had all kinds of guests, cookbook authors, farmers, people in the industry, celebrity chefs, all kinds of different things. And it was a gas. So it was a lot of fun. So that's how that started.
It's amazing, because I was just going to ask, so going from music, going over and switching to focusing on produce, I knew there had to be a bit of a story on that. So that was from Guido the Gardener, got you started as the produce pair.
Yes, that's right. And, he was already Guido the Gardener. Everybody called him that.
Huh.
And everywhere I worked in fresh produce, people said, "Hey, Dan the Produce Man." So I said, "Okay, I'll use Dan the Produce Man then." And so we used those nicknames. And then newspaper articles came out about us, and we were asked to be on local television and national television and different things. And they kept comparing us to these guys called Click and Clack. And I said, "I don't know who Click and Clack is. What is this?" They had a show, I guess, called Car Talk. I guess it was on NPR or one of those.
Okay.
And they talked about automobile, fixing your car.
Yeah.
And I guess in comparison, we had the same type of banter going back and forth. Guido and I had a good mix. We bounced off of each other very well. It was a lot of fun. So
That's awesome.
That's great.
That's awesome. Well,
Hey, I want to know.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Amanda. Jump in. Dan, I very much want to know what your favorite produce is.
That's like asking me what my favorite song is.
Yep.
Top five.
You better
top
have
five.
one too.
Well, okay. How about this? This time of the year, I have two. Okay.
Great.
And we already talked about one, and that's local asparagus. The other one is the heirloom rhizome grown artichoke out of Castroville.
Oh my gosh, I love artichokes.
Yes. But, next month, well, let's see, next month is May. So that still might be in there, but we'll get into, June, we'll get into what will be my favorite item that the time of the year will be Blenheim apricots, Royal Blenheim apricots.
Love it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we'll get into stone fruit varieties and, certain varieties of peaches and nectarines in the midsummer that you don't see in the mainstream grocery stores because they don't ship well, like the Fay Alberta and the Angelus and the Suncrest you'll see, but some of the older varieties and the new variety, new things, pluots. The Flavor Queen, Flavor King pluots are like the stars of the season. And then, we'll get into late summer, we'll get into Gravenstein apples and, different melon varieties. I mean, there's nothing like a midsummer, perfectly ripened honeydew melon or orange-fleshed honeydew. You pick it up and it smells like a pack of Lifesavers candy. And oh man, and I have a couple of videos up on my YouTube and Rumble where I'm showing the difference between just the two most popular melons, besides watermelon, the cantaloupe and the honeydew, and what the difference is during the winter and during the summer, because it's a whole different experience. And I want people to know, if you tried one during the winter and it tasted like a sweet cucumber, now try one in the summer, you're going to get a whole different experience. So, I mean, it's really hard to pin it down to a favorite item. But what do I have every single night? I have a big salad every single night.
Salad. So
That's great.
interesting, though. But I can understand, like, with just all those different factors of growing, you would get something that tastes completely different. I'm sure the nutrient profiles are even different. It's got to be. But it's interesting. So I have a question, Dan. So it seems like when you were on the radio and people knew you were working in produce, you were getting all these questions. People were interested to learn more about the industry, which is kind of how we're over here doing the blockchain of setting things up so people can really have the true data of where things are coming from today. So my question, I'm just curious of what kind of questions were they asking? Were they asking similar things at that time, just trying to better understand the industry, or what kind of questions would you get?
Well, back then it was mainly consumer questions.
Okay.
And I mean, it did a lot of food service as well, and that's a whole different ballgame. But it was mainly consumer questions. Those first questions coming to the radio before the Produce Pair radio show, the questions that came in organically from people calling in. At the time, stores were, there were still some tricks stores were using. Now they don't use them. They don't use any tricks. But at the time they did. And people wanted to know, why is the melon that I bought at a large chain flavorless, but the one that I bought at the local produce stand where I was at the time was so delicious. Why? What's the difference? And, then so I talked about harvesting, shipping, when it was, where it was coming from at the time. Look, melons they'll start, what do we say, like maybe the 20th of next month out of El Centro area. That's, you can spit to Mexico from there, but that's where they'll start. And then they'll move up, all the way up to Stockton and this area as well. But we get questions like that, get questions about, hey, mangoes, corn, hey, we just got some corn and we got the water boiling and we're going to, how long do we have before it loses its flavor and the whole bit. And at the time, that was the situation. But now with the super sweet varieties, and they're non-GMO, by the way, the corn that you get in the store to eat for folks. People got to understand that. And these super sweet varieties, they'll stay fresh. You throw it on the side of the road, and it'll stay fresh for 7 days. I mean, that's how sweet it is. And then some folks complain that it lost its corn flavor. The sweetness has overtaken it. So you can never satisfy everybody. See, every customer has a different question, and you got to answer them, the best way that you can for the situation.
The platform like you have, I'm sure you have literally been asked everything under the sun, moon, and stars.
Yes, and I've heard every joke, that folks could say, about produce over the years, and a lot of different questions. And these days, it's more like, is it GMO? Is it organic? What is the carbon footprint? This and that, and I say flavor over everything.
Yeah.
And that's what was always my thing. Let's promote the enjoyment of fresh fruit and vegetables first, because you can get people to enjoy it, then the nutrition will naturally follow. And teaching kids about it, one thing I loved when I had my market is I was asked to go to a lot of schools. And they get 2 or 3 classrooms together, and I would come and talk to the kids about produce and ask them questions. And I'd bring, things for them to eat. I'd also bring $5 gift cards for them to give to their parents, because some of those kids' parents weren't shoppers yet. And I'd give them to the teachers too, and say, you can only buy fruit and vegetables with this, because we sold other things. And that worked out really well. The kids loved it. We created a coloring book with the Produce Pals. I had a guy create the Produce Pals for me. And watch out for that. The Produce Pals are coming really big pretty soon on T-shirts and on hats and everything else. But that's another story. But we little cards with the Produce Pals on them and different things. And then we did a kids club. A produce kids club, where they would commit to eating a certain amount of fruit and vegetables every week, and then they would come in and they would, they'd win things, T-shirts or with the Produce Pals on them, or more produce or whatever it was at the time, and that was a lot of fun. Another thing we did was CSA boxes because I dealt with so many small local farms, and a lot of the farms have CSA boxes, but they, it's you're going to get 6 weeks of butternut squash. I mean, yeah, I love butternut squash, but do I want to eat it every week all the time? I want to mix the variety. So with all the different local farms, we put together the CSA box, which went over really well with several different growers in there. And we'd put eggs in there as well from local chickens and things. And that was a lot of fun as well. So
CSA box, was that like a home delivery of they would get their packages local? That's awesome. Is that still around, CSA box?
That box I started, yes. When I sold Dan's Fresh Produce, I was considering keeping the box part, but I didn't have a spot at the time where I could do it. So I let it go with the person that bought my business. And they're still doing it today. The guy that bought my store is someone who is very enthusiastic about fresh produce. There was a lot of people that wanted it. And had I been able to buy the building as promised, I would have stayed. But it was falling apart, and I don't want to keep putting my own money into somebody else's building. And it was time to do some other things in the business. I kept getting calls to help people in their stores, so I got into consulting. So anyway, but that box is, yes, it's still going. I called it the Farm Direct box, and Chewy, the guy who bought my store and company, are still doing it today. So I'm very happy to see that continue.
That idea, just being able to source from all the local farmers and growers or ranchers in your area, it's phenomenal. Because I really feel like, it's something we look at all the international markets, the trades, all the things that go on in the world. Like if we were able to feed ourselves locally, it just brings that power to the people. Plus, we get better quality, we get better nutrient density, we get all those.
I think I lost you there, Amanda.
Well. Oh no.
Okay, there you are. You're back. We lost you for a minute there, or at least I did.
Well, what was I saying? With all of the things that are going on in the world today, the wild things between countries and this, that, and everything else, I think that it's so important to be able to secure and have our own food sources, just as a number one thing, that
Absolutely.
Each country should be able to focus on that, should be able to feed their own people. But also there's that additional benefit. If you're getting healthier foods, you get a better nutrient profile. The kids will be healthier. All those benefits come with that too. So I love that. Support the local farmers and growers and ranchers at any chance you can.
Oh, absolutely. Customers would say to me at times, how come your Swiss chard is $2.99 a bunch, and down at the large chain it's $1.99 a bunch? And I said, well, one, look at the size of this bunch and how many leaves you're getting. You're getting a lot more than what they're packing in those boxes. And I know that for a fact because I dealt with all that stuff and I would go check those stores. And two, you're supporting a local grower, a local independent grower, and you're putting, shoes on the farmer, work boots. You're helping them repair farm equipment or whatever it is. It's all going back into the local farm community. It's not traveling very far, so that extra dollar is not really an extra dollar. The one you're getting down at the supermarket, yeah, it's good, and continue doing that because we want to support all growers, but it's $1 less for a reason.
It's almost like you can look at that dollar as an investment in local health, keeping those farms there. $1's a dollar. It's bad when you've got a whole shopping cart full of stuff and they're all a few dollars extra. I understand that can hurt, on some people's budgets, but it takes a little extra for that time, that quality, that care that's given. So it's well worth that additional investment always. And then when you look at how much money you're going to save down the road from eating things with better nutrients, you're going to be healthier, less medical bills down the road, Fingers crossed.
Yeah. And this was fresh picked yesterday,
See?
Who knows when the other one was fresh picked? Taste the difference. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, we're getting to nearing the end of our sort of segment slot that we had here, about 45 minutes. And we've covered a lot of ground from where you got started to your favorite produce and season and some of the byproducts. I'd love to give you a moment just to get on your soapbox and talk about to our audience, grow community and the larger audience about where they can continue to find information about you, where you're going to be presenting, when your next podcast might be, all the good things. And of course, any links that you mentioned we'll leave down in the Googly-Doo down below here underneath our posting. But this is really just a good opportunity to self-promote there, Dan.
Okay. Well, again, aglifemedia.com. Go there and click the podcast page. That podcast is called Fresh from the Field Fridays. It's on Apple, Spotify, all the places where podcasts are posted. Sometimes I'll post a video of it on mainly my Rumble channel, my YouTube channel. I do other things, but sometimes it'll go there as well if there's enough visual in it. My Substack, Getting Fresh with Dan the Produce Man, I just started that, but I was using Tumblr and realized that people don't really go there or they have to sign up to read the articles. So I switched over to Substack, and I'm starting to take a lot of the articles that I wrote for the local magazines and newspapers in the old days and updating them to today's, to what's happening today and putting them up there. So it's still kind of young, but it's there. And the Produce Industry Podcast, Getting Fresh with Dan the Produce Man on YouTube and Rumble. And one thing I would like to say is support your local ranchers, your growers. And, we discussed that already. Buy domestic first. And even, if there's imports in the store and they're still in the pipeline, talking from other parts of the world, and the local crop has started, go with the local crop. And I know the stores don't like to hear this because they want to sell what's left out there, but
I love it.
Look, we got Argentine bartlett pears. When the California bartlett pears start, buy the California. Start there. And when you're in the produce department in your stores, farmer's market, or favorite place for buying produce, try something new, something that you have never tried before. Each week, give it a shot. You just may end up with something that might be your new favorite.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, having this conversation. And we look forward to following up with you in the future. I hope to have another conversation. And as mentioned, everyone listening or watching, look in the comments section below here. You'll find all the different links if you want to reach out to Dan and follow along in his journey. Amanda, as always, thank you for moderating and coming in and enjoying the conversation with us. And we look forward to catching you on the next Pastor Primetime, a Grow Renaissance podcast. Until next time.